May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Hey, Father Mark, what's going on with the celebratory stole this morning? It's Pentecost. And everybody knows the color of Pentecost is green, except for feast days. Feast days, I bet you the Altar Guild didn't know about that. But it is a feast day. It's the feast day of climate hypocrisy. And I'm leading the parade. My cars operate on gas fairly efficiently, but still leaving a notable carbon footprint. I don't have solar panels on our house, arguing that we have too many mature trees to make that an economical expenditure. And while I recycle, I have to admit I'm a bit lackadaisical about what goes into which bucket. And yet here I am, preaching on one of the Season of Creation Sundays recently introduced into the church year. Frankly, and I've issued this complaint before, I'm not sure how I drew this straw. You know, is Pastor Janine just trying to get under my skin? Or maybe she's trying to nudge me to be a bit more ecologically compliant. But as I look out over this audience this morning, I suspect I'm not the only one in this parade. Do you still use disposables for your picnics? Do you prefer the newspaper tossed on your lawn or purchased at the store to the digital version? And do you still pick up water in plastic bottles when you're on the go and in a hurry? I do. And I suspect many of you do as well. So let's spend a few moments this morning considering our stewardship of God's creation and how we overcome our own indifference, our own lethargy, and our own sense of helplessness. Despite the environmental progress since the late Senator Gaylord Nelson's introduction of Earth Day in 1970, we find ourselves in a precarious position with unprecedented assaults on virtually every dimension of creation. Individually, we are often overwhelmed by the complexity of these challenges posed by a planet experiencing such profound change. And collectively, as the church, rampant partisanship fueled by science skepticism have hobbled and frequently halted the ability to marshal this country's vast intellectual and financial resources in addressing key environmental issues. To be sure, there are many policy explanations for our indecisiveness and our inconsistent action. But I find especially intriguing this morning is the observation offered by philosopher and activist Bayo Akomolofe and shared just moments ago. Let's listen again, perhaps even more intently. In hurrying up all the time, we often lose sight of the abundance of resources that might help us meet today's most challenging crises. We rush into the same patterns we're used to. However, the call to slow down works to bring us face to face with the invisible, the hidden, the unremarked, and the yet to be resolved. Slowing down is thus about lingering in the places we are not used to, seeking out new questions, becoming accountable to more than what rests on the surface, seeking roots. Slowing down is taking care of ghosts, hugging monsters, sharing silence, and embracing the weird. The challenges to creation are many and often seem insurmountable. A climate in crisis, the search for carbon neutral energy, the sustainability of agriculture, and rising sea levels, to name only several. But it's in the face of this broad array of urgent issues that Akamalafe encourages a deliberate, a disciplined, and patient approach to considering specific problems, the options available to address them, and the subtleties embedded in both. Implicit is also the need for the application of a consistent framework, a structure, to help us assess, to help us develop policy, and to help us engage in strategic implementation in our own community and around the world. In partnership with the Earth Bible Project, Lutheran biblical scholar Norm Hobble has proposed 6 principles to guide our care of creation. And let me assure you, when Professor Hobble speaks, I listen. I had to. He was my professor 50 years ago. His first principle is the recognition that every element of creation, from single-cell organisms to complex societies, has equal inherent value. They are to be respected as the work of God's hands, and they're to be understood as essential to the world we inhabit. Second, these elements do not exist in isolation. They're not only related to, but interconnected with each other. They are, like our families, this congregation, and our community, inseparably linked in a way in which any change affects all of creation. Consider, for example, expanding the nation's energy capacity through nuclear production. Certainly a potentially important contributor to economic growth, but also posing the significant danger of disposal and contamination of our land. The corollary to this interconnectedness, this systemness, is a sense of distinct purpose. And without each functioning, creation falls short of God's intention. From the smallest atomic particle to the largest mountain, each fulfills a central and essential role in harmonizing our world. Now, admittedly, I've yet to discern the value of a tick or a prairie dog, but I'm assuming that's my lack of study and lack of biological sophistication. Hobble also invites us to listen to the voice of creation itself. Although we are its stewards and its protectors, creation has its own voice, its own agency. Wildfires that cry out as we continue to pollute the air and generate the conditions that cause them. Hardtack pastures and parched grazing ground because water has been diverted to landscaping. And the deaths of the most vulnerable in our cities because of the heat islands created by the asphalt and concrete that houses our economy. Indeed, creation tells us when it's stressed and pained. If only we'll listen. Although creation does indeed speak on its own behalf, it's certainly not a solo performance. We, you and me, truly are full partners in this stewardship. Not only are we to listen, observe, and understand the needs of the world around us, we're tasked by none other than God to marshal the means to address them and to take action. Research alone, no matter how sophisticated, is not sufficient in meeting God's expectations for our environmental partnership. No, we're summoned to bring the best of science, public policy, resources, and political will to ensure the gift of this remarkable planet for generations to come. Finally, we're called to embrace the care of creation as a priority, to resist the injustice that daily threatens it. Longtime St. John's parishioner and climate activist Nancy Iverson regularly reminds us that without a sustainable planet, all of our efforts to achieve a just society will be of little consequence. These 6 principles offered by Norm Hobble provide a solid theological foundation for our understanding of stewardship and creation. But the real question for us is, so what? How do we mobilize them? How do we actualize them? How do we bring them to life in our community? How do we change the world? Nourish and sustain creation. Episcopal priest and environmental advocate Margaret Bullitt Jonas has offered an especially practical strategy. It's grounded in our concerns with God in prayer, voicing those concerns, raising our petitions, and listening intently. Especially in a time of climate change denial and alternate facts, research and education are essential to understanding the environmental challenges we encounter and the fact-based and responsible alternatives for solving them. As we've already noted, action, intentional, focused, and principled, is required to initiate and sustain progress in our work to reclaim creation from the damage humans have and continue to cause. And finally, she summons us to corporate boardrooms, the public square, and the halls of government to advocate policies which protect creation and make its gifts accessible to all. To Bullitt Jonas's fourfold approach, we might also add the liturgical act of blessing, imploring God to direct our ministry and approve the work of our hands, even as we rejoice in the work of God's hands. Now, principles and strategies notwithstanding, the care of creation remains a daunting challenge, collectively and even more so individually. The infinite complexity of our world, and as Okomolafe reminds us, our tendency to rush toward solution seem to bog down even the most committed activists among us. Perhaps then we each need to slow down a bit. Take a step back from the seeming insurmountability of the problem and focus on what we can do to begin making even a small difference for the planet. Installing hardscape, cycling rather than driving, adjusting our furnaces and air conditioners, simple things, small things, but they're a start on our journey to more faithfully honor all that God has created. May this table gather us in common purpose in the care of our planet. May this Eucharist unite us with Christ in this work. And may God's Spirit so enlighten, empower, and move us to act. Amen.